Welcome, listeners, to another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love, hosted by Richard Osler. In my home on a Sunday afternoon and cold January day, recording this podcast in person is my friend Tonya Baker Miller. Welcome to the podcast, Tonya.
Thank you, Richard.
I'm going to give you a little bit of introduction about Tonya, and then I'll turn it over to Tonya to see if I got most of that right. Tonya is a clinical social worker, and she got her undergraduate from BYU and a master's in social work from the University of Utah. And she is a married mother of 4 children. Her husband's here with us today. And her son, Andy, the oldest of their 4 children, was on episode 382. You could check that out. Andy's a gay Latter-day Saint. And Tonya's going to talk about families that have what may be called a crisis of faith and are working to keep the family circle together, but wanting to continue to participate with the church, but may have questions about how to make that work. And from her clinical perspective, from her firsthand experience as a mother and as a parent, she has some really wonderful insights. So this podcast, if you're in a crisis of faith, if you're a parent working to keep your family circle together in trust and confidence and vulnerability and communication, this podcast will be helpful for if you want to continue to stay involved with the church and are looking for tools and principles that help you navigate that path forward. I think Tonya will have some insights for you. If you have family members that have left the church, I think she'll have principles and insights that help keep the family circled together, even when the reality of that becomes part of your family. Also, Tonya and her son, Andy, and maybe the whole family were on one of the original Church's Mormon and Gay Stories. It came out in October of 2016. That's a long time ago. One of the very first stories the church published called Tonya's Story. And that's her story as mom of a gay son. So is that okay for an introduction?
That was great. Yes.
Anything you kind of want to add or clarify, especially the scope of the podcast before, because you know it better than I do, before listeners dive in? I just want to make sure that they know kind of an idea of what you're going to share.
Yeah, thank you. So what you said is perfect. I do want to challenge the idea a little bit that we are dealing with faith crises, that maybe we overuse that term. And there's a possibility that what we are experiencing instead are related to trust issues, or we could even call it a trust crisis. And framing it that way, I think, opens so many inroads, really, to healing that we maybe can't notice if we are functioning in the space of thinking that I can't have my faith and this church.
That's good. And your station with the church is an active Latter-day Saint.
Yes, it is.
So I think it's good our listeners know this is coming from someone who's in the church and is sharing these principles from perspective as an active Latter-day Saint.
Thank you. Yes. And I should note today too, I have some lived experiences to share. I listen to so many stories, and every story is sacred, in my opinion. There are some examples that I am also going to share from friends. They will remain anonymous, and some of the details will be changed, and everything is with their permission. I want to point out, though, for listeners to know that all of the quotes or stories that I share are from people who are active in the church and are trying to navigate the space between the uncertainties around just what the optics are of having a family that doesn't fit a certain pattern or mold, and being part of this community, this religious community.
Perfect. So glad you're on the podcast. So I'll just turn it over to you.
Okay.
Go for it.
So for I think that the principle I want to start with, or the observation, I should say, and that is what I do. I observe things. I don't have judgment around the things I want to describe and talk about. These are observations. I think sometimes when we step into this type of discussion, we are almost on autopilot, right? You might hear, this is who Tonya is, and so I can predict what she will say based on what I've heard, or and I might do the same. And so I want to put it out there that this is a judgment-free space. These are observations, so that maybe people can just relax. And so it's kind of based on the idea that the way I would frame it is that in the people I know and the stories I'm going to share, it seems that the general church's guidance around faith-based issues, it tends to be kind of formulaic rather than individualized. And I will talk a lot about that. And I think I'm going to dig in with my first lived experience with this. And it was quite a long time ago. It would have been in the late 90s. So we were living in student housing at the U of U. Dylan was in medical school. I worked evenings and weekends in the psych unit. We were juggling two kids. My younger brother, he's 6 years younger, had just left to serve a mission in Brazil, and probably 6 months earlier. And I get a call one day. He and I are pretty close. And I get a call, and he said, "Hey, I need you to pick me up in the airport at the airport in 3 hours." And I said, "Okay." Like, what? Well, see you then. I didn't ask anything. I just wondered if he was sick or what the deal was. And I am fuzzy on a lot of these details. It was a long time ago, and I wasn't privy to all of the experiences that he or my parents were having in this time. But what I recall being told was he had left the MTC, been in Brazil for less than 2 weeks, and was mugged. And it really, really created a lot of pain for him. That was he, as anyone would, I think, that vulnerability. And he was traumatized, and spoke to his mission president, who said, "Want you to stay." Tried really. I just think he was so traumatized. He wasn't doing well with the language. He was very unhappy. They reassigned him to somewhere in California, and he worked there with someone as kind of a self-styled therapist, and they called it forgiveness therapy, which I can't even imagine what that was. And it wasn't useful to him. And I guess the day came that he said, I'm either going to step in front of a bus or I'm going to buy a plane ticket. And I'm so glad. I'll be forever thankful that he bought a plane ticket.
Agreed.
And called me up. But he didn't tell anybody else. So I pick him up at the airport, and I think I'm taking him to my parents' house. And he said, "Can I just stay with you for a while?" And so for about 3 months, he was with us. My poor parents, my mom decided she didn't want him to come home. She didn't want him to be seen. She didn't want him to be judged, I think. She knew we had family and the ward nearby, and I think she felt so protective of him that made sense to her. And my dad went along with that. I remember there were times he would go to talk to his stake president, and he never came back very happy. The goal was to get him back out into the mission field, and eventually he went. They reassigned him yet again to somewhere near Washington, D.C. And I was really critical of my parents. So I now see they were operating from so much fear. They had no idea what to do, and they wanted what they believed was best for him. And especially at that time, late 90s, there was so much shame and stigma around, or so much more, I should say, shame and stigma around any kind of early return missionary, and around mental health challenges. So he did he went back. I mean, sheer grit, I'm sure, got him through it. And you can kind of guess where the story goes. Within a few years after returning, he really differentiated himself from the church. And I know that it was really hard on his relationship with my parents. There's some abandonment themes there that I'm sure could be explored. The thing about that story is it didn't need to happen that way. Had there been a way to manage whatever was happening for him in an individualized way, rather than the formulaic approach of, well, when there's a missionary that does this, then we do this. And I'm fairly sure that when he was working with the stake president, it was around repentance issues that he had left. And that makes me really sad because he was in so much pain. So without realizing it, that was my first introduction to the possibility there might not offer the patterns that families need to handle whatever comes their way. And the other stories that I'll share are similar in that regard.
I think it's great you shared that story, just to sort of frame up what you're going to share for the rest of the podcast. That's a tender story.
Yeah.
And I sort of imagine you have used student housing. I can see it along Foothill Drive. And these years where you're really busy with a couple kids and helping your brother and being a safe place for your brother. But you introduced a word that no one's ever shared with me before, formulamatic. I'm sure it's a clinical word.
Formulaic, yeah.
Formulaic versus individualized. And that resonates with me because I just think sometimes we have these formulas that when people are in a certain spot, we sort of have these formulas to get them out of that spot. And sometimes that's probably okay, but I think the principles of personal revelation and uniqueness and individuality require us to have maybe a principles-based approach and an individualistic-based approach. You also said something really interesting is sometimes the patterns, I won't say it as well as you did, but the patterns that our family structure works in may need to be different than the patterns the overall church infrastructure works in. And there may be more need for customization, individualization, and the church as an institutional worldwide church doesn't perhaps have the flexibility or the ability to do that like we need to do in our families. So I'm really excited to hear the rest of what you're going to share with us.
So based on that idea that, and I will say, I don't think this isn't a criticism of the way that the general church operates. When we dig in a little bit into ways that trust is repaired, that's just not the relationship that individuals have or can have with an entity such as and I'm going to say the institutional church. I think it's okay to use that phrase, isn't it? Yeah. Okay. So let's jump really quickly. If we could just look at, because I want to differentiate between faith and trust. I think we often use the two words interchangeably, but the concepts are very different. There's a developmental psychologist. His name is James Fowler, and he maybe you're familiar with his stages of faith. Yeah, so it's a fascinating body of work that he combined, or he built off of other developmental theorists to say that just as there is epigenetic development for the way our brains develop, or the way we develop psychosocially, or the way that morality develops, there is a similar developmental process for faith in our lives. And so he in fact, I'm going to read a quote, if that's okay, from his book, Stages of Faith. And in this, he is referring to a theologian named Richard Niebuhr. This is what James Fowler said. He sees faith taking form in our earliest relationships with those who provide care for us in infancy. He sees faith growing through our experiences of trust and fidelity, and of mistrust and betrayal. with those closest to us. He sees faith in the shared visions and values that hold human groups together. And he sees faith at all those levels in the search for an overarching, integrating, and grounding trust in a center of value and power sufficiently worthy to give our lives unity and meaning. Faith is a universal concern. With that lens, we can go a lot further in understanding the overlap between trust and faith, and what it is that's happening when someone, the optics of their faith, the way they live their faith, evolve over time. And if we look at trust, and this is a pretty basic definition: belief in the reliability, truth, ability, or strength of someone or something. Trust begins in infancy. When we're talking about those developmental stages, Erik Erikson's psychosocial stages of development, trust versus mistrust is the very first stage, and it occurs 0 to 18 months when a child is learning that their caregiver is responsive. So is my caregiver reliable? If I cry, do they come? If I need comfort, will they give it? And from there, we continue to grow and develop. So given those two ideas, that there's overlap, but not everything is exactly the same between faith and trust. Then we can look at, say, okay, what's happening for my brother? He began with a trust crisis. He did not know who to trust, who would watch out for him and help him. He was so disoriented and confused, and he turned to the systems, meaning the family and the church, that theoretically were in place to provide that for him, and found that they were not reliable, actually, given the circumstances that he was in. That faith crisis, or that trust issue, that trust crisis in his case, definitely evolved into a crisis of faith. Had my family had the resources to say, let's repair here. We can do stuff in our family that the church can't do. Let's make this better with us. I think that would have prevented a lot of pain. I don't have any judgment around whether my brother wants anything to do with the church or not, and that would not be the outcome that I would focus on as the value. The outcome that I think would be most valuable is for the family to be able to see this experience as an opportunity to rally, to build each other, despite what else is happening.
It's really powerful. I'm glad you're using the example of your brother as you go through this podcast, because it makes it real. And you said something that I wrote down, hopefully as close to word for word. What can we do in our family to create trust that the church can't do?
Yeah.
I think that's a good way to look at it. I've always felt the church, and Elder Uchtdorf has kind of talked, it's the scaffolding. It's not the core. The core is the family.
Yeah.
Our doctrine really ports everything to the family, and the family is and so I think what you just said really resonates with me. And sometimes we look to the church to solve everything, but I think they want to give us principles to then take into our family to solve things that perhaps the institutional church really can't solve, and may even generate mistrust or pain or trauma in just people's lives, like your brother. So keep going.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about one other issue around trust. And it's called the trust control paradox. And it's something that is studied in kind of the business or corporate world, in between, as it looks at relationships between like management and employees. What is trust and what is control? And it's interesting when we really look into the way that in families, I think especially we talk about trust. I think we're a little bit off. We're talking about control sometimes. There's a marriage and family kind of guru named Terry Real, who points out that oftentimes what we envision as a good, trusting, safe relationship involves just harmony. Where's the need to trust if we just always have harmony, right? So the research around trust from a clinical point of view says, well, I'll just read a quote by Terry Real. As a culture, we do not teach repair. We teach harmony. This is an immature narrative about what healthy relationships look like. True trust does not come from unbroken harmony. It comes from surviving the whole thing together.
Wow.
So if we take that idea to the space of the family, and recognize that there's so much confusion around what trust is, where it comes from, how it's healed. And then we look at the way that, for instance, we might dialogue about trust. So let's say there's a teenager that, comes home late, breaks curfew. The parents say, we don't trust you now. And this is what you have to do to earn our trust back. Doesn't quite work, because what they're describing is we're going to control you again. Essentially, that's what the teenager feels, at least, right? We're going to control you again until we can believe that we can relax around the possibility that you might do something we wouldn't want you to do. So the way we dialogue around trust, I think, creates a lot of confusion. So that's the trust control paradox. Am I saying I really trust you, or am I saying, no, I actually really want to control you so that I can relax? That's how I'll manage my anxiety around your agency, essentially, right? The harmony piece with that. So let's pull that back in. We love this idea in the church, don't we? In church culture, we just, I think, really overvalue the idea that a happy or good family or a happy or good life is evidenced by harmony in relationships. And that isn't that a nice idea? And yet, do you know anyone that genuinely that's how things are going? Because I don't. People have stuff. I heard someone that I really admire once just say, she said, we're all just saints with stuff. Aren't we though? So think of the dissonance that introduces when someone has an experience, whether it's with the church or in a way that they are exercising their agency, which disrupts the harmony, right? And then the family or the parents, let's use a parent-child example again, the child disrupts the harmony. The parents say, no, we don't have trust. No, what you don't have is harmony. You have an opportunity to build trust though, because if you can lean in and will lean into the dissonance that space offers and see the dissonance as a teacher, what can we learn about each other right now? How do we get through whatever it is that's happening with our kid? Why did they want to stay out late? Maybe our 9 p.m. curfew is too early, something like that. 9 a.m. That probably wouldn't be a good curfew. If we will rework the idea that trust and control have anything to do with each other, lean into the dissonance that agency brings into our relationships, and recognize that as an opportunity to actually become closer and increase trust, we're going to be so far ahead in terms of, I don't remember the phrase used, keeping the family circle. However, our culture just really doesn't support that possibility.
I love that. Just keep talking.
Okay. Well, let me share a few more stories.
Good. We like stories.
Okay. So these kind of fall under the category of ways that, and I'm going to jump back out to the general church and the confusion I think that members in general overall have around, okay, I'm going to do what I believe the church is modeling. I think we often confuse the church with church culture. That's very easy to do. And I think there's a lot of blending between church, gospel principles and church culture. So there is some confusion. So I'm going to focus on ways that trust in the church is damaged, right? So we give so much power in our lives to the church and its representatives. And should we ever find ourselves in a space where we are, and I'm just going to use the word othered, that damages trust. I thought I fit, I don't. My brother was very othered, right? I'm using a story of a very good friend who's probably around 35 years old when her husband told her he's atheist and that he was just done with the church. And the ripple effect that this created was so painful. She had enough to think about, and yet I'm gonna grab some of her quotes. The curiosity rather than the caring that was exhibited created a lot of pain, additional pain that was really unneeded. And so her trust in the church to be a space of nurturing and love and acceptance was challenged a little bit. She said, I think we are caught in very black and white thinking. We can give permission. We could give permission to not feel super comfortable, but we don't, right? She describes people asking her if she was going to get a divorce. And I love her response. She said, I don't know what will happen, but I love him and I need to build a life with him, assuming that he won't, quote unquote, come back. People who dance around, are you going to stay with him? I just say, what good would that do? Eternal marriage is still what I want. To leave him now would defeat that purpose. That takes a lot of courage, I think, for someone to so gently and carefully challenge the rhetoric that is, I think, that blend of culture and doctrine. She gave a talk recently. She was just released as a Stake Relief Society president and was asked to speak when she was released. And she introduced herself and said, I want you to know about my family. They're the ones that you'll see playing ping pong in the driveway when you come up the hill. And they would love it if you would stop and visit with them. Her ability to be in that space grew because she would lean into the dissonance. If she had stayed in the extremes, her options would have been so limited. I'm going to be in despair, unhappily married, wishing and hoping for something that I can't control in terms of her husband's interest in the church or not. Or she could have done like what I can't believe that people would just ask, like, well, are you going to leave? Those are the only options that the extremes provided. So had she not had the courage to lean in, think of where this family might be now. Now, is her trust in the church damaged? Yeah, of course it is. In part because the church culture grows from, I would say, policies more than doctrine. I think we have doctrine, policies, and culture. And I always imagine them as a projector, right? My dad taught me that. Church culture, it's more handbook based than scripturally based, and the handbook is not doctrine. So that's and just another example of how trust in the church is damaged. Sometimes it's from talks. We can just say it. There are some talks given in from leadership that just make you kind of say, "Ouch." And I can't recall what talk this was. It was years ago. My dad would have been alive. My dad was this lovely, he was a BYU professor who was also just this staunch advocate for LGBTQIA individuals. And I called him once after a talk that was an ouch talk. And he said, it sure is hard to preach contempt and love from the same pulpit. That's all he said. Unfortunately, that happens. That happens sometimes. So thank goodness I could call my dad. I could lean into the gray and that dissonance and say, what was that? Instead of either telling myself, don't you question that. That's not a good idea to question it. You just need to rank and file. You need to get in line, or to reject it and say, that's it, I'm out. I cannot be part of an organization that teaches something that painful. Go to the middle. That's where it's at.
That's great. I love your phrase, lean into the dissonance.
I think there's also the yo-yo effect that really can damage trust. I think the example that comes most readily is the policy around LGBTQ families. Occasionally, leaders, the scrutiny that leaders receive, just makes me so uncomfortable for them. That being said, they have so much power in people's lives. And if a leader, inadvertently comes across as harsh or judgmental or short, when someone has invested so much hope in what this leader represents, that can damage trust. I'm going to read some exact quotes. These aren't really easy to hear. They're from a young person I know who has come out to me and not to anyone else. And no one would ever be able to identify who this person is based on the way they live their life, where they're at. They said this: being comfortable going to church depends on who else is in it. That whole performative, we love you but don't support you, just sets me off. The trust crisis is like when people assume they are better than me. They will automatically think of me as less. That makes me not want to be at church. She said, we can't keep doing the same thing again and again. It's causing so many problems. Let's not pretend right now. Let's not spit out lies. This is a young person who's in a lot of pain, who does have significant faith in the Savior, and whose trust in the institution of the church and in her local unit is pretty much destroyed, right? Well, guess what? Her family could create space for this experience that she's having, these thoughts that are just running through her mind, to not be so threatening, that she may differentiate from the church. Sounds like she's kind of on her way. She does not need to lose her family over that. And the family absolutely has, I think, a stewardship over these relationships. That if I were to say, what's my stewardship as a parent, I would say it's the relationship, not the outcome of.
Wow.
Oh.
That's stoppable podcast material
Okay.
right there. My responsibility as a parent is the relationship, not the outcome. That is powerful. And that feels like it's so much easier to do as a parent. As a parent of 6 kids, I feel like I have more ability to control that. It does take 2 people to have a relationship. And you do have some situations where even that's not possible. But the outcome to me it's not part of our doctrine to control somebody's outcome anyway.
No.
That's really powerful and very helpful, Tonya.
Okay. That makes me want to read a little quote from just what you just said, from Wendy Ulrich. Do you know who Wendy is? I don't know her personally, but I really admire her work. She is also a therapist, right? It used to be called the Association of Mormon Counselors and Psychotherapists, but I believe the name was changed after we were asked to refrain from using the term Mormon. So I don't know what it is now. Anyway, she said this. Before I say this, this is what I would hope that this young person might be able to do. Should her family rally someday she may not need to. If it is as she fears and the family will go to an extreme, I hope that this kind of idea goes with her. Like Laban clinging to the brass plates he does not even value, family members, and I would add the institution of the church, who are abusive, neglectful, or addicted, and I would add misguided in their loyalties, sometimes interfere with our knowing what is real about our lives. Those Labans insist that they have exclusive access to what is true, refusing to acknowledge our right to our own reality. Like Laban, they may deny us our truths, even though they do not value the truth themselves. When staying in relationships means jeopardizing our trust in our own voice and experience, when the soul life is in danger, sometimes the Spirit may prompt us that our only resource is to take our truths and run. If we'll lean into the dissonance with families, we do not have to do that. No one needs to run. Now, individuals may need to run from the church. You interview many of them that the church just cannot provide what their legitimate needs are at this stage of their life. And that's not a criticism of the church. It's just an observation. So anyway, we could go on and on about, I think, ways that trust in the church generally is damaged, and ways that can trickle down into the family space, right? So my child has this issue, or my neighbor, or my friend, or my whoever, and I feel like I have to go to one side or the other rather than lean in. That's where trust is damaged. So
I just like this topic. I've never been in a training meeting or a classroom discussion or heard a church talk where someone says, what do we do for people that have lost trust in the church, that have been harmed, that have had a harmful experience or traumatic experience? This would be a very logical thing to talk about at church. And you would be comfortable talking about it. But I think we need to learn in our congregations to have these kind of discussions so that people that have had a painful, I call it church-generated pain or church-generated trauma. That's happened to me. I've had a couple of really difficult experiences as a committed Latter-day Saint. It was kind of shocking to me to realize that this could happen. And it's obviously given me more empathy and compassion, because I recognize it can happen to others since it happened to me. But it's something we never talk about. And that's why I'm glad your voice is there and others to learn. Maybe that's an invitation from both of us. If you're listening, and if you're in a stewardship responsibility in a local ward, to consider a talk about. I think you're going to leave with some quotes, but I think this is something we could talk about in our congregations to just develop tools to navigate helping ourselves or others that have painful church experiences where the institutional side of the church has failed them. So I'll turn it back to you, because you've got more to share, and I don't want to run out of time.
No, you can keep talking. I love everything you say. I think what you say, though, maybe is a really good segue into maybe describing a little bit more of what we learn from taking that epigenetic development perspective and applying it to what is faith, right? So what you point out is the difference between what Fowler refers to as the synthetic conventional or stage 3 faith. You're familiar with this? Yeah. Where, there's a synthesis of values and information. They create a basis for identity and outlook, but it's incredibly rigid. It actually aligns in terms of, if we were to compare it to like brain development or psychosocial development, it's late adolescence, early adolescence is concrete thinking. We're barely into formal operations where we can do abstract kind of thinking, and which means necessarily that things tend to be one way or another. And there's a lot of contingencies. If then there's not a space for paradox and variety and dissonance, right? And so when someone introduces that idea, or even has a need to be validated for wanting to explore, for progressing in terms of their faith, there tends to be a very big pushback from and I'll just, we're a stage 3 church, from general membership, right? Who, through no one's fault, tend to be in that very rigid space. There's another, you're familiar with, last name is Peck. I'm forgetting, Scott Peck. He wrote like The Road Less Traveled.
Yeah.
Yeah. So he kind of built off of Fowler's work and condensed a little bit around his stages, made it a little more accessible to someone that doesn't have a psychology background. And he said, and I'm quoting him here, perhaps predictably, there exists a sense of threat among people in the different stages of religious development. So someone who is moving from stage 3 to stage 4, which is when you individuate. Stage 4 is, or reflective. That's what it's called, individuative or reflective. So this lines up, if we're going to look at, again, human development, with the development of your own identity, right? Late adolescence, early 20s, you become your own person. That is essential. It is essential for happiness. That's how God created us. I think He created us to develop in the ways we develop. So someone has an experience, maybe it's a terrible one, like we've been, referencing. Maybe it's simply they've traveled. Maybe they've known someone who is so different than anyone they've ever met before in terms of life experience and perspective. And that draws them into the stage 4 space where they can say, okay, I know what stage 3 was about. It's all very symbolic and ritualistic. I wonder what life will be like with less of that. Or for some people, none of that. So I would say my brother is at a stage 4 faith. It's interesting because if you were to ask someone, I think in the church, like just sort of like general, I'm way overgeneralizing when I say in the church, they would say that he's regressed, right? He has lost faith. When in fact, what we know is he has progressed past stage 3 faith into the individuative space. Now, people can stay here their whole lives. People can stay in stage 3 their whole lives. After stage 4, we can enter into. Now,
does stage 4 mean you're leaving the church, or you're out of the church, or can you be a stage 4 and be in the church?
You absolutely can. Okay. Yes. So, stage 4, I think is essential for growth. And you can individuate from your family of origin without completely cutting them out of your life. Right? I had someone tell me once that imagine making like a peace sign, like that's good parenting. So because you've got at the base of the 2 fingers, it's connected, and then gradually the 2 fingers separate, but there's still the connection. So absolutely, you can be in stage 4 and still be very much involved in the church. You're just able to differentiate yourself from that rigid, we would call it like tacit thinking, meaning just really unexplored faith. We call it tacit faith. So
one of the things I've picked up, but somebody shared, is those that are in stage 4, or maybe you're going to talk about even stage 5, I think it's not like a rank order. It's not like, even though they may do this, stage 4 people shouldn't be, even though they may naturally want to do this, pull 3 into 4. I've heard that some of the very best stage 4 people recognize that stage 3 people need to stay in stage 3, and it's deeply healing and helpful, and their life is complicated, but that part of their life, their religious experience needs to be that kind of experience. And they don't want the complexity, the nuance, the dissonance.
Yes.
Even though they may need those tools later on. And I recognize I left stage 3 when my lived experiences being a YSA leader over a couple gay men just opened that door to stage 4. That's sort of, and because you kind of gave some examples, and that's what really happened for me is when I just listened to somebody that was having a very different experience than I was, and it brought me in. And there's dissonance and complexity with that and pain with that, because you kind of want your stage 3 life back.
Right.
But just like that Stake Relief Society president, her ability and your ability too to reach people and to minister and to bless and to mourn and comforts, I think increased with the skills that come with the dissonance and the complexity and the nuance, and your ministry grows and your ability to reach and help and heal grows. And it's a good thing, even though it's a painful thing.
Exactly, right? Most things worth doing hurt a little bit, right? Yeah, I love what you say though about stage 3. Every stage we treat with respect.
Yeah.
And for so many people, if say they've come from a chaotic space in their lives, the routine and the ritual and that tacit kind of faith, they don't have to explore. I can follow, I can believe, I can feel harmony. That might be just what someone needs, that safety and predictability.
Yeah.
And when that becomes the consensus in terms of church culture, rather than saying, oh, look, we're all at these really cool different spaces in our spiritual development, that's when we're going to run into more trust issues.
Yeah,
right?
I agree.
So, and yes, let's talk about stage 5, conjunctive faith.
Cool.
Stage 5 is probably where you're at. Stage 5 is it's the idea that you can continue to function as your own soul, right? That soul journey that Wendy Ulrich refers to, that is not threatened anymore by including your stage 3 faith symbols and rituals in your life. Before stage 4, those symbols and rituals, that adherence, it was limiting. But after stage 4, when you move into that conjunctive space and you've learned who you are, right? And you have maintained your personal, most private part of your life is your connection with Jesus Christ, and that it's still there, and you can have it and also participate to whatever degree it feels meaningful in that stage 3 space. And so when someone can reach there, it's beautiful. I think it is a little isolating though, because like I said, and I'm going to share a couple more quick stories. I think the examples, especially the primary president and this other one I'm going to talk about, they're stage 5 people, right? No one would know. They look like stage 3 people until they stand up and give their talk, or they walk out, maybe if there's something harmful being said. And then there's, again, what Peck points out, there's some suspicion, right? And then it's a little isolating. So can you be in stage 5 and not have trust with the church generally? Yeah, you probably don't, because that complete adherence, that kind of rank and file, mostly exists for stage 3, and that can feel good to some people. But let's say what happens, say we've got a child who is moving into stage 4 and the parents are quite happy in stage 3, is like, what's going to happen to trust? That depends. If the parents can even try to value what it is their child is trying to teach them about themselves, what the child wants to teach the parent about the child. That's also repairable. And yet, I don't think it happens as often as it could in LDS families.
It's good.
Let me toss out real quick. We're only a couple more minutes. I do want to tell.
I don't know if you had some quotes you wanted to read from a primary president.
Oh, I did those already.
Oh, you did those. Okay.
Yeah. Good. No, there were a couple. I wanted to talk real quick about one more. Yeah. The last one I want to talk about is a missionary that was sent home. She had gone through the whole COVID thing, been reassigned, ended up where she was originally called, ran into some health issues, and was just told one day by her mission president, "You're going to go home." Now, she was serving, she didn't want to go home. She was serving in a place that had great access to medical care. Her parents didn't want her to come home. And this would be an example of one of those times where the church applies its formula to a situation rather than being able to focus on the individual. This family really has struggled with the way that this was managed. That it was so they felt so insensitive, that it was very insensitive. So where does this tie into what we're talking about with the whole trust thing? The family doesn't have a trust issue together. They're all very united in the way that this, in their perspective around what happened. What does a family do when together they recognize limitations in the church's ability to support? That's a difficult space to be in, because there are so many loyalties to the church and so much gratitude for the church. And yet, you hurt my kid. So this family has a difficult task because they need to heal the trust that has been violated with the church. It's not within the family. The family's doing great, but together the family is saying, "I don't know about this church now," right? So what do they do? That is one of the things that I wanted to look at. They're in a hard spot. I don't know. What would you tell that family?
I'm going to let you keep talking.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, this experience got kind of worse and worse. There were little things from kind of just like that gentle misogyny, like that she was referred to as, we'll say his name is Bob Sweetie, instead of using her name. Just kind of those kinds of things. And by the end of it, they were really hurting to the point that they were saying, "What do we do as a family with this church?" They, last I talked to them, don't plan to leave. However, they will continue to hurt, is what they will do. There's this, and we're going to talk about ways to repair trust. There's this problem that shows up when the damage is done between the general church and an individual, or in this case, a family. And it's the betrayer that can help the betrayed heal. Like, if we could have that, so much could change, right? So this family is going to remain in the church and hold a deep level of mistrust for it, because the betrayer can't help the betrayed heal, just because of the way that the organization is created. What can I do? So I'm their friend, right? I can make sure that they can trust me, that they are safe to talk about whatever it is that hurts, and that I will not judge them. I have no desire to influence whatever decisions they make. I can, in some ways, I can't totally help. I mean, obviously, I can't help them heal around what happened between them and the church. But as someone who loves them, I can pull in the other pieces of ways to heal trust and reassure them that not every relationship is fraught with that vulnerability.
I love what you said. Yeah, all of us can do that. It's part of our baptism covenants. Probably you're particularly good at because your clinical training and all your expertise, but what you did, all of us can do. And I like that. I think of my natural reaction 10 years ago in those situations would be to defend the church and perhaps minimize their experience by saying you're overthinking this or you're too easily offended. We have talks about not getting offended.
Yeah.
And my older self, after hearing enough of these stories and having clinical people probably mentor me, as just sit with them in their pain. And I don't have to sell out the church to do that. I just sit with them and honor their pain and validate their pain. And often it decreases the wedge between them and the church just to have somebody sit with them in their pain and acknowledge it and validate it. And it usually, in my experience, doesn't sort of add fuel to the fire. It usually is part of the path to healing. Now, I recognize in an ideal world, you're pointing out the institutional church generally doesn't come to the plate to be the healer, even though they're the betrayer. We're just not at a stage in our church where we're apologizing, and we are a little bit sometimes on some of the things we've said about Black Latter-day Saints in the past. But I think but us rank and file members can do the best we can. And we're in a situation when someone opens up, I would just invite us to do what you're doing, is just sit with people and be a safe place that they can open up, especially because the church is a place we usually turn to be healed because our trauma is outside of the church. And so that's the safe place. But if the safe place becomes the place of trauma or pain, just like this missionary that was out on the Lord's errand, consecrating her life, I think you said her to the church, and that then becomes the source of pain. It gets complex to turn back to and that's where the Savior comes in and good friends and therapy.
Yeah.
And at the local level, often we can sort of be the bridge to rebuild trust or to just acknowledge that it may never be the same, but we still want you with us.
Yeah. Well, I want them with me.
I want them with you.
Don't speak for the church. I don't know. I'm not like that. I'm not the church. And I don't have an agenda to keep anyone close or far. That is between them and Christ. So I hope that's okay to toss that in there.
I think non-agenda love
that's kind of your jam, isn't it?
That's a pretty good motto. I just think that accomplishes more good than agenda love.
Yes, exactly. So real quick, to wrap up, ways to repair trust. And the church will probably not be able to offer these things. But we can do this. Again, we can help people heal who have had their trust damaged, or within our families. We can do these things. We've got to listen. The person who's been hurt, they just need to be heard and validated, and with listening with that intent to genuinely understand, not in a way of prove it to me. Sometimes that when we say help me understand, it's almost like prove it. It's just please let me hold some of this for you for a minute. If we are the ones who have violated trust, which we've all done, hate to say it, we've all done it, be open to just recognizing it and take responsibility, take ownership and accountability, trying to pretend that we haven't done anything wrong, like gets us nowhere and is so damaging to relationships. And it's a two-way street. You know, if I can show up and say, I am so sorry that what I did was hurtful to you. Ideally, that person could again feel safe, and because it's been modeled that it's safe to take ownership and whatever space they need to go take ownership, they might be more inclined to do that. So not only do we offer it, we model it, right? I talked to another friend. She's a marriage and family therapist. She said, repairing trust takes talking, and more talking. That's not stage 3. It's just not. We tend to go to one side or the other. We kind of, there's a sense of closing ranks, as it were, at times. And but talking, let's do that in stage 4 and 5. It's safe to talk. I'm going to quote Terry Real again, the marriage and family researcher. Says, recovery is today, in this moment. I am not going to withdraw. That's the talk. That's how we restore trust. I am here. I'm not going to pull away. And then I kind of like to pull in the idea that, we are commanded to forgive, right? Think about Nephi. He did frankly forgive. There it was. We're not commanded to trust. That to me just highlights how completely differently we can benefit from studying these principles. Repairing trust is going to take a while, and it's going to be so uncomfortable sometimes. And I believe it is essential for healthy relationships and for a church that values family as much as we do. To me, that is, it's a beautiful invitation to strengthen the family in a way that hasn't really been talked about or modeled. So it's in Isaiah. It's one of my favorite ones, Isaiah 40, where he talks about, in fact, I'm going to read it real quick. Let me open it up. Isaiah chapter 40, verses 28 through 31. I'm going to wrap up with the idea that it is true that when we have, today at least, it is true at this point, that when the betrayer cannot be the one to offer healing to the betrayed, Christ is always there. It would be nice if in every situation the betrayer could be an element there to that healing. Christ is bigger than any pain we will ever experience from betrayal and from having our trust damaged. And there's no need to fear, I think, because of that piece that we know. So I'm just going to read from Isaiah. Hast thou not known, hast thou not heard, that the everlasting God, the Lord, the creator of the ends of the earth, fainteth not, neither is weary. There is no searching of his understanding. He giveth power to the faint, and to them that have no might he increaseth strength. Even the youth shall faint and be weary, and the young men shall utterly fall. But they that wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings as eagles. They shall run and not be weary, and they shall walk and not faint. I think waiting upon the Lord is a little bit like trust. So that's kind of where I wanted to wrap it up. Thank you.
Great scripture. I'd like to ask you a question or two. Talk to parents who are really hurting right now because their kids have left the church. Their kids are off the covenant path, whatever language. They're worried about their eternal family now being together. They're just full of fear and their original hopes with little kids, now that their adult kids has changed, and they're just really hurting.
Yeah.
And I know clinically you meet with those kind of parents. Just talk to those parents right now that are in that situation.
Yeah, thank you. So what those parents are experiencing is grief. And research around grief says that it is so important that we mourn our dreams. So I hold that baby and I have, it's all planned out. I already know what's going to happen, right? I've got this dream and it doesn't happen that way. I don't know anybody for whom that has been the case. Mourning dreams, the level of grief there is similar to that of bereavement, so of death, right? So maybe the fear is, if I need this space to mourn, that my child isn't what I imagined they would become, right? They're not who I envisioned. Can I also love my child? The answer is yes. Yes, definitely make space to mourn whatever dreams need to be just tenderly treated, and hold space for all of the love that you've ever had for that child to remain. It doesn't need to be threatened. Now, this is hard. So easy to say, so hard to do. And I am going to pull in, I think, a piece of just to acknowledge how vulnerable these families are socially. There's a lot of social capital exchanged in LDS communities. And, let's say one of their kids let's say they're dealing with addiction. Suddenly no one will let their kids play at their house with their other children. Let's say they have a child that is gay or trans. People avoid them. They don't want to talk to them anymore. They're suspicious. So the levels of loss are, many deep. They're losing community. They're losing these dreams, right? Their relationship with their child is changing, which can be scary. And their relationship with God and the church is probably undergoing some change too. So, these parents know, like, if I had one thing to say, it would be, you are so loved and you are doing so well. This is so hard. And anything that is worth it is hard. But
I love that. I love that you give permission to have grief. I think that's part of healing. And I love that concurrent with that, you invite parents to love their kids and trust their kids. And I think we just trust God that they're their children too, and that God has a plan, and eternity is a long time. And just to leave all of that at the Savior's feet and do the things we can control. Yeah. Take care of ourselves and keep our family circled together.
Yeah.
But you do help me understand some of the other complexities of this in our culture. I find that I don't do a good job of asking parents in our own ward who I know their kids have left the church, just tell me about your child. What are they doing? They're often doing really wonderful things. Academically, service, they're often usually really wonderful people doing wonderful things, but we tend to drift towards the things that we talk about, like, tell me about their temple marriage, tell me about how many their kids are. And there's a lot of other things we can talk about to help see people the way I think God sees them and sees all their contributions in the world that help improve our culture that way. So these parents still feel their children are being seen by their faith community and supported, even if they're not in the church.
Yes, I had someone tell me once that they had a child that this was a parent of a gay individual, and someone came up and asked about every other kid.
Yeah.
not the gay child. And she just was shaking her head. I mean, she was able to handle it just fine. But I mean, you are right. There are some big blind spots, right? And also, we're all trying. It's okay. But can we always do a little bit better? Yeah. Right. I don't need to feel defensive that my trying isn't reaching far enough. I just want to keep trying until maybe I do a little better each time. Can I say something really quickly
Please.
to anyone who is in a space where they are feeling isolated because of either trust crisis or faith crisis?
Please.
If at all possible, try to reach out to anyone who seems safe. If your family can't be that space right now, that is okay. But whatever it is that you're going through is part of God's plan for your development spiritually. And don't feel shame or that you're less than or that you can't fit, because none of that's true. Same words as for the parents. You are so loved.
Love that. Well, listeners, we could keep going on these podcasts because I get really into the things that my guests say, and it kind of gets my brain and my heart going, and it's pretty sacred ground. But Tonya Baker Miller, you're awesome. You don't probably want to hear that label, but you have wonderful principles and insights to help us come together and help support, minister, bear, and comfort in the role of therapists, which I think is somewhat underrepresented in the culture of our church, and your skills and insights. And my personal hope is that grows and that understanding becomes more a part of our culture. I think there's a lot of businessmen like me that are part of our culture and sort of our worldview. But I think to create Zion, we need the lived experience of maybe a more balanced set of skills and the contributions. So that's sort of my plug for therapists. I'd almost wonder if I should redo my career if I'd done it differently, but that's a little bit of a tangent. But just thanks for what you're doing.
Thank you.
For individually in your therapeutic work and in your circle of influence and the principles you've shared in this podcast. And grateful to have your husband here, your son Andy here. Please, listeners, check out Andy's podcast, 382. He talks about his journey as a gay Latter-day Saint, one of my brave, vulnerable guests that had the guts to share his story. And you're some of my heroes, Andy, and others. And so this is Richard Osler and Tonya Baker Miller signing off on another episode of Listen, Learn, and Love.